Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom.
This is the state of affairs, and I am Akshay.
In almost every single state in the country, the local MLA calls the police stations and tell them when to file FIR, if to file FIR or not, and where to ignore that. And that's simply unacceptable. Whereas in India, there is not a single day when without interference in crime investigation, a police station is run.
So we know rule of law is integral to democracies world over. And we also know that in India, it is more or less dysfunctional at this moment. So how do you think this will cost India in the long run and its attempt to become a global superpower economically?
Akshit, what are the elements of rule of law? First, they must be speedy, easily accessible, efficient, low cost, justice system available to the people, civil or criminal. If there's a dispute or if there is a crime, if the crime is not punished, the society is not giving a signal about what kind of behavior is tolerated, what is not tolerated. If a dispute is not resolved, you're forcing the people into the arms of gundas and the corrupt people. And therefore, you get rough and ready justice through brutal force. That's not what a civilized society is, let alone a system of democracy. Unless there is predictability, speed and efficiency in delivery of justice, the society will collapse. Order will collapse, crime will rise, might becomes right. And in a democracy, it's even more fundamental because what are the two elements of rule of law apart from speedy justice? That law is above everybody. Nobody is above law. And therefore, the law applies to everybody and everybody is subject to law. The second element is the law applies to everybody equally. The rich and the poor, in power, out of power, educated, uneducated, rural, urban, male, female, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever. And if it doesn't happen, and in our country, not only is there no justice to people most of the time, civil or criminal justice, and therefore about 40, 50 million cases are pending in courts. An incredible number. And many people actually, they are finding extrajudicial means or simply swallowing injustice and suffering silently because they have given up on hope of justice in a civil case in this country. Obviously, economy will be affected. The rights of the weak will be trampled upon. There will not be fair competition. And the country will pay a very heavy price, not only in terms of governance, but actually in terms of economic management and social cohesion. If people lose trust and faith in the justice system, if you feel that I will not get justice because I am poor, I am weak, I don't have access to power, then democracy itself is completely discredited. So on every which plane, without a genuine rule of law effectively in operation, not merely on paper normatively, the society collapses and the economy diminishes.
And so you've also spoken how as we urbanize more and more, the societal controls that we had in place in India will diminish and the role of the police becomes even more important. So in that context, do you think that we are equipped at this stage to deal with the kind of urbanization that we're witnessing?
No, we have been lucky as a society because India, despite the obvious problems and failings, has remarkable civilizational strengths. The families are very strong. Even now, most members of the family, their behavior is dictated by the family's concerns. Similarly, there is a sense of dharma transcending religion in India. The sense of what is right, what is wrong, good conduct, bad conduct. It is internalized civilizationally in the country across religions. And the third is the fear of the odium, the fear of the ridicule or the humiliation in the society at large is holding many people on the straight and narrow path. As you said rightly, with urbanization, all this will slowly diminish because all these are possible only in a highly personalized society where everybody knows everybody else. Rural society. Urbanized means impersonalized. You don't even know who your neighbor is. If that is the case, the social controls will diminish. Already we see the evidence of that. And over time, if you don't address this challenge now effectively, they'll collapse. And if that happens, not only is it detrimental to democracy in a broader sense, it actually is detrimental to order in society. Crime will be uncontrollable. And because there are no legal controls because of failure of rule of law, and there are no social controls because of urbanization, we'll be totally rudderless. In order to understand the magnitude of the problem, you have to actually see what's happening in some other countries where there's really no rule of law, no strong social controls. For decades, people have been talking about a city like Karachi in Pakistan, how marauders roam the streets, criminal gangs take over, mass abductions take place. I visited Mexico a couple of decades ago at the invitation of the then President Vincent Fox on some governance conference. And people told me about how people every day live in fear of abduction of some member of the family or other for ransom. It became part of life. Or you go to some of the African countries. Some friends told me in Nigeria years ago, a man with a uniform, a soldier would come, point a gun to you and say, give me money or else. So no, we haven't seen anything yet in the country. We complain so much about India. India is still a very orderly, civilized, very peaceful country. But we should not take it for granted. So the dangers are very real. And let alone for the constitutional propriety and democratic niceties, purely for our own peace and order in society and harmony in society, we desperately need to institute rule of law effectively, actually in operation, not merely normatively.
Yes. So even according to the famous psychologist Abraham Maslow, who constructed the hierarchy of needs, so security and safety is the most basic need. So why is it that our governments often put this on the back burner then? And it's not the most
to be fair, Indian governments, we have been reasonably good in law and order.
Okay.
The broader security function and order function, Indian governments have been pretty good. Partly because British India emphasized on that. The legal framework even today is largely that. And even the Constitution recognized it. And therefore, Indian Constitution recognized preventive detention. Without conviction, you can actually put away a person in jail with certain caveats and safeguards, etc. Our fundamental rights are not unrestricted. There are no absolute rights. We have been very wise in designing these things. Reasonable restrictions is the normal standard. So I don't think we have failed in terms of broader security and public order. But we have spectacularly failed in delivering justice and ensuring instruments of rule of law in the sense of equality before law and law being above everybody. And therefore today might is right. Habitually today, for instance, in almost every single state in the country, the local MLA calls the police stations and tell them when to file FIR, if to file FIR or not, and where to ignore that. And that's simply unacceptable. Elsewhere in the world, take Britain for instance, a minister will never be able to call a police station and tell them what to do in a particular crime. The last time such an interference was there, it happened, I think in Campbell affair they called it, in 1920s. It's almost 100 years, 100 years. In the Campbell affair, because this Campbell was proven to be a spy, and those days the society was polarized with socialism and capitalism. Socialism was still intellectually one of the major forces in Western Europe. So the cabinet decided not to prosecute Campbell. The government fell on that. When they interfered in a crime investigation and prosecution, a government fell. Since then, there is not a single instance of government interfering in crime investigation. Whereas in India, there is not a single day when without interference in crime investigation, a police station is run. So we have to really set it in order. So far we've been lucky, as I said, but we cannot continue.
Thank you, sir. This has been very enlightening. This is the state of affairs, and this is Akshay.